Good morning. I'm Esther Manheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the July 18th, 2024 Agenda Briefing Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The live meeting is streamed through the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website, or via the live stream. The live meeting is available on Charter Spectrum Channel 193. You can also listen to the meeting via phone at 855-925-2801 with meeting code 7037. And as with all of our agenda review meetings, we do not take public comment during this meeting. Council and staff, please unmute yourselves and say a quick hello when I call your name. Vice Mayor Sandra Kilgore.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Good morning.
And our city manager, Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager, Ben Woody.
Good morning.
Our city attorney, Brad Branham.
Good morning.
Our city clerk, Maggie Burleson.
Hello.
All right, thank you. And Councilwoman Shanika Smith will not be joining us today. I'll now turn it over to City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, good morning, all. Welcome to our agenda briefing work session. As you know, this meeting is designed for us to review your upcoming work session meeting, which will be July the 23rd. Also to provide an overview of upcoming committee meetings and agenda items. And then we'll do a review of upcoming items over the next 8 weeks. Also, we don't have any other issues, excuse me, and updates on the agenda, on this particular agenda. And we do have a closed session following this meeting. Assistant City Manager Ben Woody will be reviewing the upcoming July 23rd council agenda, and I'm going to turn it over to him, but with a word of this meeting is very dense in terms of the number of items, in particular the consent items and public hearings. So we have scheduled the meeting at Harris, and Ben will talk a little bit more about that. So, Mr. Woody, you are up.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell, and I appreciate that introduction. And good morning, Mayor, members of council. And we do have a lot to cover on the agenda and in our council committees. So as is typically the case, I am not going to cover everything, but I'll highlight key items. If there's anything that I skip or don't cover and you'd like to discuss, please stop me and let me know. So we'll start our meeting on Tuesday, as Ms. Campbell referenced, is at the Harris Cherokee Center. So just want to note the change of location. Start time will be at 5 p.m., but again, it will be at Harris Cherokee Center. So moving into the consent agenda, I'm going to start with items B through G. So I'm going to group some together. All of these items are related to our water department and projects that are underway. I'm in particular going to highlight items B, C, and G. B and C are related to the water department's continuing efforts to identify where needed and replace lead or galvanized service lines. And we've talked about this before. We've applied for several grants and received those at the city. And as we continue to obtain that funding support from the state, we are beginning to move forward with inventory and water lines and replacing those where lead or galvanized lines exist. And so the item B is B and C are an additional grant we've received as a city. But I think more importantly, we've identified our first replacement project in the Shiloh neighborhood. So that'll be the first place we're actually beginning to do some of this work. Staff has conducted outreach in Shiloh since January of 2024. And just as a reminder to council and the community, when there is a water service line replacement that's needed, and that's whether it's on the public or the private side, this funding we've received from the state will result in replacements that have no direct cost to the homeowner. So again, just looking to get out in that community. That's our first place we're going to be and try to get some of these lines replaced where we identify those. The other item I'll highlight in water is item G, which is the issuance of revenue bonds that support the water meter replacement project, also known as the AMI project. So that's going to help fund that and keep that moving forward. That project is approximately 25% complete with an estimated substantial completion date of October 2025. Any other questions on those water items on the consent agenda? Okay, moving forward, I'll move to items H through J. These are 3 items from our sustainability department, and these items, each of these are the renewal and amendment of existing contracts that the city has with local nonprofits. And these contracts with these nonprofits, they support the implementation of previous council resolutions. And with these nonprofit partners, we work to address waste reduction, food policy, and energy efficiency. So again, this is just amending and renewing these existing contracts with those partners. I'm going to skip down to items M through O. These projects are underway in our DCREF department, that's Chris Quarles' department, and these 3 items include the amendment of our lease with the Asheville Tourist. And what this amendment does, it memorializes the agreement that was made to increase the annual rent payments for the use of McCormick Field by the tourists. So that was part of the discussions that occurred when council and partners agreed to provide renovations to McCormick Field. Item N is the continuation of the HVAC repair and replacement project at the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium. So we are well on our way to having a fully functioning HVAC system in that facility. So again, that's just a continuation of that work that council prioritized. And then finally, item O, we're going to talk more about this later. Item O sets the public hearing for the closure of a right-of-way that's directly behind HCCA, and that closure will facilitate the reconstruction of the Rankin Avenue substation. And just want to highlight that we are going to be talking about the Rankin Avenue substation rebuild project at our August PED meeting. Any questions on the DCREF section of the consent agenda? Okay, I'm going to keep moving. Last 2 items I'm going to cover on the consent are items Q and R. These 2 items authorize contracts that support some of the maintenance work that you have previously approved in city parking garages. So item Q is a contract in the amount of $135,639 that supports ADA improvements in the Wall Street, Rankin, and Harris garages. Item R is a contract amendment in the amount of $525,000 that will support engineering drawings and construction administration for the remaining prioritized repairs at all 4 of the city's parking garages. And just as a reminder, these maintenance repairs that we're moving forward with, the total budget for this capital repairs project is $11.3 million. So this represents our continued efforts to invest in those facility upgrades. Yes, Councilwoman Ullman.
Ben, referring to the ADA improvements, is this going to be resolving the elevator issue in the Civic Center deck?
It does not. I believe it resolves issues with our ADA parking space configuration and access to those parkings. I don't want to put Jade Dundas on the spot, but I'm going to. Jade, is any of this, I can't see how it could connect to the elevators at the contract amount. So if you could confirm that.
Yeah, Ben, I think you're exactly accurate. This is the parking and accessibility. The elevator is a project that's being worked on. My understanding is that it's the parts have been ordered and they're a long lead time. They may have actually received parts and they were incorrect. So it's being worked on independently, but that's the status of that.
Okay, it'd be nice to just know an estimate of when. I know that you can't change that the wrong parts came, but it's just always good so that we can expect and communicate. And if that changes, I'd love to know when.
Yeah.
Let's follow that up.
Yeah, we'll add that to the follow-up document. We'll get that information to council. Any other questions on consent? Great. I'm going to keep moving. We do not have any presentations and reports scheduled for this agenda. However, we do have a number of public hearings. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
I'm just wondering if we should clarify that the Reparations Commission extension request they requested them moving it to August.
Right, yes. That was, yes, thank you for that, Ms. Campbell. And that request will be on your August 27th meeting agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, and probably under a portion of the agenda that allows public comment.
Great. So our first public hearing item A is a consideration of an ordinance that establishes the F.W. Woolworth Building as a local historic landmark. And what that designation does is it recognizes the Art Deco architectural style of the building, but also recognizes the building's importance as a site of local civil rights protests and activism in the 1960s. And what this designation does, from a city's perspective, it provides an additional level of review when interior or exterior renovations are proposed, and the city is able to look at that and make sure that those renovations are consistent with the historical character and history of the building. But from the owner's perspective, the benefit is it qualifies the property for a 50% annual property tax deferral. The HRC did consider this request, and they are recommending unanimously in favor of the local landmark designation. Moving on to public hearing item B, this authorizes the submittal of the FY25 annual action plan for CDBG grants and for home program funding allocations. These are federal funding sources that are administered by the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department. This public hearing is the final step that will define or that will establish the community investments for these federal funding sources. So for the CDBG funding, the HCD Council Committee is recommending 9 grants, and that'll be information that's provided in the staff report, for a total of $1,075,035 for CDBG grants. And then for the home program funding, the Asheville Regional Housing Consortium is recommending a total of $1,011,026 for 1 grant and a set aside for future rental construction projects. And I know these items have had discussion at our HCD Council Committee. Any questions on these items? Or this public hearing item, I should say. Okay. I'm going to keep moving. Either I'm doing a great job or you all have really prepared for this agenda briefing. Our next item is public hearing item C. This is related to the general obligation bonds that have been proposed. I just want to know, you'll have to take multiple actions on this public hearing item. So you'll need to vote separately on each of these 5 items. And following the public hearing, what you're doing is you're voting to first adopt the bond orders, which are proposed right now at $20 million for each category. And then you also will vote to set the special bond referendum for the November 2024 election. So this is really your final step and puts this GO bond process into motion. I just want to note, we've said this before, that council, you are able to lower the individual bond amounts for each category, but you cannot increase those amounts. And if there are any questions on this, we've got Tony McDowell on the call today. So anything on the bonds we want to discuss? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen real quickly, and we're going to talk about the last public hearing item. And I think this is one of the principal reasons that we are in the Harris Cherokee Center for this meeting. Public hearing D, and this is the site plan, the most recent site plan. It is a Conditional zoning at 767 New Hall Creek Road. It's been moved several times from your agendas with the purpose of providing additional time for communication between the developer and the residents. And there's been a lot of meetings on this particular development. And I think council has a general understanding of the request, but just to summarize, what this application does is it proposes 49 single-family dwellings and 35 townhome dwellings. So this totals 84 new residential units. And then a couple of key elements of the project, it proposes 3.8 acres of tree canopy preservation area. It proposes additional screening measures adjacent to neighboring properties. And then finally, there's been a relocation of an access road to Sleepy Hollow Drive. And what that does is it increases the tree save area and reduces the number of retaining walls that are needed. That access shift is something that wasn't in the original application. However, planning and zoning at their meeting in March, they did recommend approval on a 4-3 vote. And then finally, planning staff is also recommending approval of this conditional zoning. Any questions on that? Councilwoman Roney.
Yeah, can you put that slide back up, Ben?
Yes.
That would help because it was different than what we saw in the, we didn't really have something for our check-ins last week. So I'm trying to just make sure, because I'm getting a lot of questions about this as we all are, that I'm like getting this right. When we, in the check-ins last week, we talked about there were, in order for Sleepy Hollow to work and the bridge not to be bolstered or improved, there has to be a condemnation, and there were two options. One I was pretty clear on is that council could vote on it, but the other option was still a little fuzzy to me. Is it that the property owner has a lawsuit and I don't understand against who? Yeah, Brad, can you speak to that?
Yeah, Ben, if you don't mind, I can jump in and answer, I believe, council.
I don't mind at all, Brad. Thank you.
Question on that. Yes, you have pinpointed one of the very significant changes that has come about in the most recent iteration and the one that's going to be becoming before you, and that is the access onto Sleepy Hollow Drive. The necessity there is that the developer needs to gain legal rights to a parcel of property which is currently outside of the development area, and it will allow them to connect that road into Sleepy Hollow Drive. You can see that just essentially on the immediate southern part of where the road, the entrance road will connect to Sleepy Hollow Drive. One of the options that's available always in situations similar to this is the city could potentially condemn that property. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, let me go back a step and say that right now, the only issue that the developer has from being able to simply make this connection themselves is that that particular lot has some existing covenants and restrictions on it. It raises the question about whether or not they are allowed to build a road on that property. Now, in order to get over that hump or hurdle, there's really two paths that the developer can utilize. One would be a cooperative agreement with the city. If they were to purchase the lot, the city council could authorize the city to, quote unquote, friendly condemn that parcel for the purpose of constructing a public road. That is not absolutely required, and that's something that city council could consider as an entirely separate vote if the developer asked you to do so. What is more likely, I believe, in this situation is that the developer can file what's called a quiet title action, which is asking the court system to make a determination about those covenants and restrictions and determine whether or not a road like this would be allowed. That is probably the most likely option that the developer will utilize. If they do that and they're successful, it does not require the city council to take any action to condemn a parcel, and there will be no requests coming from the developer to do that. So that is one of the options, but I suspect it would be only if the developer were unable to obtain the rights through other legal means on their own.
Okay. And that isn't something that we need to worry about on Tuesday because that would happen after.
That is absolutely correct. So what you are looking at here is purely, as is all council members are used to, a request to rezone this property. With all rezonings, there are things that the developer has to comply with. in order to allow the development to actually come to fruition. In this case, one of those would be that they obtain the necessary rights, one way or another, to be able to connect on a Sleepy Hollow Drive. So council doesn't have to consider whether or not that can happen or will happen, only that if the developer is able to, are you comfortable in approving this development as it's presented?
Okay, and then that would bring up another, I guess, secondary question that's been coming up is, do we have an idea of recent issues with the bridge or the road where there has been issues with flooding? Do we have that documented anywhere?
I don't have that readily available, Councilman Roney, but we can certainly include that as a follow-up item.
Yeah, I think that one's important because I think because of the whole scenario and not imagining the impact of just this area, but what it means beyond the bridge, this is like the opportunity where we would touch this situation. And it would just make me feel better to know that we're improving infrastructure as we can.
Thank you. Councilman Ullman.
A similar question, do we, and I'm not sure if this is required at this step of the process, but has there been any traffic studies done? And if so, could those be shared? Because I hear that concern given the one way, and I just would be curious to see that information.
Just so you know, the neighborhood did a traffic study. I don't know if the developer was required to do one, but the neighborhood did one. But I don't know if we have a copy of it.
Yeah, if anyone does, go for it. I would love to see it. Otherwise, I could also reach out to neighborhood groups, but curious if that's in any of our files. I'd love to take a look.
So we will pull that information together. My understanding is that the developer does has a traffic study or information related to that. So we will make sure that is part of the invitation on Tuesday.
Councilmember Tony.
Thank you. Could you put that slide back up, please, for a second?
Yes. Sorry about that.
I'll probably skip over this and we'll probably hear more about
I have to put it down to navigate the other windows, so give me 1 second.
Oh, no worries. I think we'll hear more about this from the applicant on Tuesday, but I was excited to see this number 5, what was called number 5 and all the variations being the one chosen. And what happens with that, this alternating entrance we're talking about, if you look to the far right corner of this rendering, that allows for the bridge not to be built, which was a $1 million expense, if I recall, which allowed for fewer residences to need to be built. So they were able to save more trees. The other big thing is right where you see that green, which I believe is indicating a greenway pedestrian area, that green line, there would have been this like 500-foot long retaining wall that was like 10 to 15 feet tall. And with this option and that alternating entrance, the retaining wall gets removed. There were so many variations. I was really impressed with how this project progressed because there were a lot of options and the applicant and the neighbors were really in the weeds with each other. But I'm thrilled to see this come forward. So hopefully what they're working on will work legally, or hopefully we don't have to condemn anything. It's come a long way. That's all. Thanks.
Any other questions or follow-up items for this additional zoning request? I'm going to put the map down. Okay, if everybody is good, that is our public hearings for Tuesday. We'll have a number of those as we just reviewed. The last item on your council agenda for Tuesday is under unfinished business, and that is an update on where things are at. Not an update, but some items related to McCormick Field. We actually have Jay Dundas on today, who's really been, capital management's been really the lead department on this. And so I'm actually going to turn over to Jay and let him give a little bit of background on item A under unfinished business.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning, Council. Jay Dundas, Capital Management Director. So I was going to try to minimize the presentation, but we added a slide. This will be kind of similar to the presentation we gave last briefing, and then it'll be more or less the presentation we'll give on Tuesday. So I pared it down just a little bit for the purposes of keeping it brief here. Let's share real quick. We are presenting the guaranteed maximum price, asking council to authorize the guaranteed maximum price adjustment for the completion construction of McCormick Field. Key takeaways really highlight the timeline that we're trying to work through, have been working through, and will continue to work through for the delivery of this project. It's very tight. Construction manager at risk is the delivery method in which we're using. There's been a strong effort to try to keep this project within the overall design and construction budget of $38.5 million. All involved have been working diligently to meet the expectations for fan accommodations, MLB requirements, and all of the to turn this into a more multi-purpose facility. And then there's broad contractor-led business inclusion effort to generate interest in the project and competitive and inclusive bidding environment. So again, just to kind of capture in a visual the time frame, this is a lot of work from literally beginning to end in a 3-year period. Construction manager risk is new to this slide deck. Essentially, it's construction manager risk, or CMAR, is a construction management company that's hired to manage the services throughout the project. They are a partner in the design effort and help us with constructability assessments, is estimating and bidding. They've been essential in this because of the short timeline, really helping us keep tabs on what the estimates are and being able to help us be value engineer through the project. This is different than design build. Design build is a design contractor partnership. We in CMAR, we hire a designer and a construction manager independently, and yeah, we put them on the same design. We bring them together as partners in the design effort along with the city contributions. And then it's contracted in 2 phases. You pay for pre-construction services, which is everything that all the services they've rendered up to this point in time, and then they deliver a guaranteed maximum price. And so essentially, rather than us bringing a general contractor's price, a bid price to the council, we're bringing a price that will not exceed based upon the bids that are delivered, but also allowances and the estimates of the construction manager at risk. And that's going to be important for the following conversation. One thing they've been essential in is the business inclusion efforts. That's been it's working with city staff. This is a list of all of the efforts that they've hosted, the meetings that they've hosted, and the outreach that they've done. There is and then so essentially back down to the details here is these numbers have changed from the briefing submission that we did submitted here earlier in the week. That was based on preliminary bid estimate openings that happened last Friday. That is about half of the bid packages, and that's again one of the opportunities with the construction manager at risk is they're giving us a price at which they will construct the project. And so we do not have all of the bid packages open, but based upon their estimates, the risk part of this is that they're willing to provide us with a guaranteed price at their risk, understanding, having a very detailed knowledge of all of the other remaining activities that are yet to bid. Part of the reason that the main big bid packages, it was the intent to open up the majority of all bids on last Friday. The circumstances of us not getting 3 bids is still applicable for their opening of bids. They did not get 3 bids on all of their projects. The ones that they did, they were opened. And then the ones that they didn't, they'll open on Tuesday, the council meeting day. And so we'll have some additional information and some revised numbers I'll be able to bring. That will not affect the guaranteed maximum price, but it potentially will help us be more informed about business inclusion. And so we're working with them to really further understand and get them to a point where we can start getting construction started. Business inclusion highlights. This is another area that part of their efforts with the bidders is to sit down and do a scope review. The initial bidding that was the bids that were received on Friday had indicated that there was a 14 to 16% participation, minority women-owned business participation. That scope review work that they've done since Friday has indicated that with one of the larger contractors, the contractor that provided one of the larger bids, that they sat down and found that there were some omissions in those bids, and that contractor is considering a withdrawal of that bid. And so that is not an insignificant amount. It does have a fairly substantial impact on the percentage participation. We are still happy to say that given the participation, all the rest of the participation up to this point in time, we are exceeding the goal of 8.34%. It's 8.41% with the remaining bids to open. They do believe that they'll achieve similar and maybe even better results than what they have up to this point in time, expecting that the remaining bid packages will allow for us to increase that business inclusion number up to 10 to 12%. And also we have not, it's not absolutely confirmed on the withdrawal, but it does look like that might be the case. So next steps, this council briefing, and on the 23rd, we'll do we'll open up the remaining bid packages. We'll present council the guaranteed maximum price for the construction of McCormick Field, and then authorize special inspections contract with Terracon, authorize single source contract agreement for door hardware, so we can just make sure that we're consistent with our lock sets over there. And then approve the extension of the McCormick Field lease, which has been covered, I think, in the consent agenda. Ongoing permitting processes. We checked in with permitting. That is going well. So as an organization, we're working well on this project together. Groundbreaking ceremony is expected for August 28th and construction begin in September. And that concludes just that overview. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jade. I appreciate the detailed update.
Yep. Thank you all.
That concludes our council meeting agenda. Any last questions or anything we want to cover before moving to committees? Okay. Seeing none, we have 5 council committee meetings to cover. Deborah and I are going to go back and forth a little bit, but we'll start. Our first committee is Environment and Safety Committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Campbell for that one.
Thank you, Dan. The Environment and Safety Committee meeting will be held on July the 23rd at 11 o'clock, and it will be virtual. In terms of agenda items, we have 2 informational items and then 1 item for action. The informational items are to elevate AVL, it's a climate justice initiative, and that would simply be an update from sustainability staff as well as from a consultant that is working with us on this effort. The next update would be the quarterly crime update from Asheville Police Department, as well as an update on the civilian crash investigation model program, something that the city of Asheville is looking at in terms of, and many other communities across North Carolina and the country, really, kind of reimagining public safety effort. And we'll be giving an update on that and a potential timeline for implementation of this initiative, we hope, in Asheville. And then the last item will be for action, and it's the Asheville Parks and Recreation 10-year plan update. This was presented to the committee last month, and we're coming back to the committee for action it is scheduled to go to full council for action at your August meeting. So that will be the extent of the Environmental Safety Committee meeting. Yes, Chairman Alvin, of this committee anyway.
Yeah. Is that action on the parks plan that we like adopt it? I'm kind of curious about which plans we adopt and which ones we don't.
Yes, this would be one that you would, from a committee perspective, move for adoption.
Okay.
And forward to full council for final adoption.
Great.
Or
Yeah.
action, hopefully.
I think this plan is really awesome. It does make me think, though, we just had a work session on the affordable housing plan, but we aren't bringing that forward for adoption. So just a little confusion on the distinction between that.
I know some of these plans with the title plan, it is kind of confusing, and we'll work on that. Maggie, thanks for bringing that up. Okay, that is it for environmental safety, unless there are any questions. Ben, do you want me to just go ahead and do policy financing? Okay.
I do, but real quick, Ms. Campbell, I just want to note on recreate. One of the principal reasons for why we want to adopt that plan is that it allows the Parks and Recreation Department to leverage grant opportunities. So within the Parks and Rec world, like part of funds and things, a lot of times when you're able to show an adopted plan and consistency with an adopted plan, it helps us leverage access to grant funding. So I think strategically, that's a plan that makes a lot of sense to adopt. And I just wanted to note that. And yes, Ms. Kimball, I think I'll let you go ahead and cover your next council committee. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for adding that, Ben. That's good additional information. So Policy, Finance, and Human Resources Committee meeting is to be determined. We are trying to get a date. Unfortunately, there were some conflicts with the scheduled date. So we are still working on that date and time. We'll get that information confirmed and out to you all as soon as possible. All the items are for information. We're not asking for any action at this meeting, and there are 3 items that are scheduled for updates, and that's the fiscal year 2024 external audit update that will be provided by staff, internal audit program update. And this is an update on the status of the risk assessment and some things that we are doing as it relates to implementation or addressing some of the concerns that the risk assessment identified. And we'll be giving an update on some audits that have occurred specifically in a couple of departments. And then we'll do our committee work plan discussion, which will be kind of a celebration of things that you all have addressed and discussed in 2024, and then looking at the next fiscal year's work plan. And Councilmember Allman, regarding compensation, the budget process, we will be talking about that and providing a schedule whenever we are able to nail down a date for this meeting for us to address those issues. Staff has equal concerns about getting ahead of the budget discussion, particularly around compensation, as soon as possible. And we hope when we get into discussing these things that we will have a director of human resources by that time. So it's timely. We are hoping that will happen sometime in September. And with that, then I'll turn it back over to you unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. I'm going to cover next Planning and Economic Development Council Committee. That is scheduled for August 12th at 4 p.m. We've got 4 items on our agenda. First is really a continuation from last month's PED meeting, but we're going to continue to discuss and move forward Unified Development Ordinance updates. Staff is going to be before PED to remove the remainder of what we're calling the first bundle of UDO text amendments. And all these text amendments really have or what I would call is housing supportive or have a housing focus. So we're aligning that with council strategic priority. But the other piece of what we're going to ask PED to discuss is the development of some anti-displacement measures. And that could be in the form of an overlay or some programmatic things. We're trying to bring forward information for PED that really covers both of those concerns, the regulatory reform piece, but also how we're addressing and thinking about potential anti-displacement. So that'll be a big topic for discussion at PED. The next item, and this is an action item for PED, is the Duke Energy land exchange. I mentioned this earlier, but Duke Energy continues to move forward with the rebuild of the Rankin Avenue substation. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in our 8-week agenda review. But what this item is in particular is we're going to have PED take a look at the proposed land exchange. So that's an exchange of land that allows the substation to be built closer to Hiawassee, but also allows the city to have more control of the land directly behind Thomas Wolfe to allow some flexibility with that facility. That'll be before PED, and we'll be looking for your recommendation to full council on that. The next item is an update on construction and permit volumes and values. And if the council, several of you probably remember this, but before COVID, we did a city manager's development forum. And one of the big pieces is we would share updates on kind of just the state of construction and permitting in Asheville. We're going to have Mark Matheny there, and he's going to give an update on activity and permit volumes. He's going to focus in on 2023 and 2024. However, he's also going to review some trends from 2018 to 2024. So that'll kind of let us see what permitting construction has looked like pre, during, and post kind of the COVID pandemic. So that'll be something we're excited to share. I think this hopefully moves us toward a discussion about what a future maybe development type forum could look like. And again, we want to have a chance to share that with PED and get some feedback. And the last thing I have is we're going to start now that the budget's adopted and all the committees will be doing this, we're going to begin the process of reviewing your accomplishments in FY24. And we're going to talk about what the PED work plan looks like in FY25 moving forward. Any questions on PED? Councilman Roney.
Yeah, just I know that we're trying to move through a lot of items today, but something that has been percolating in my mind and in conversations, not just with colleagues, but in the community is we're talking about an overlay for to protect against displacement. And we've committed to practices of stopping the harm that have been caused by things like urban renewal and redlining that are the responsibility of the city. But I wondered, is there an opportunity for us to expedite some of the recommendations that we have around development of housing with the intention of affordable housing and meeting some of those goals in the affordable housing plan we talked about in the work session, to actually have an overlay where we want it to happen, sort of like we did with the hotel overlay map. And that's what I thought we were moving towards, a path to make those community benefits that I've certainly been talking about in the community for the past 4 or 5 years. But the other part of it that I think fits with this is we never really looked at the hotel overlay map to see if we were getting what we needed out of it. So if we're going to bring something like that forward to the community to be able to expedite some of these recommendations for making it easier to build affordable housing, then I think we have to follow up too with our commitments to making sure our overlay map works like they're meant to, or we intend for them to.
Well, can I just clarify what you're saying? I just want to understand. So are you saying, like, while we're working on an overlay to prevent displacement, can we move forward with some of the other items? Or are you saying while we're creating that overlay map to prevent displacement can we include in that overlay areas where we do want to see housing?
Yeah, just imagine a different overlay map. I thought we were also going to work towards like what the missing middle housing study talks about with like, here's the transit corridors. We know that it's best practices for strong towns and smart development to build housing and residential and commercial uses close to where we have infrastructure like stormwater and transit, and to have those transit dense corridors. But if we have a chance and the community's pushing us to like really expedite building housing to meet our goals of equitable, affordable housing, then it seemed to me that we would be running these two parallel and not necessarily trying to figure out just the displacement part, but also where we want it to pilot it. And that kind of pilot seems like we could expedite it literally in my backyard, right? Because it's like, where do we have the transit dense corridors? How's Tunnel Road looking? How's Patton Avenue looking? Where's Merriman Avenue at? I'd rather see apartments than, I know it's been brought up, like a fast food spot. So it did seem to me some curiosity, like, are we ready to do that? And if so, are we really willing to follow up with the hotel overlay map, the displacement overlay map protection, and expediting housing on a overlay map with a community benefits table to make sure they're getting the outcomes? Because we haven't done that with the hotel overlay map. So if we're going to bring forward overlay maps and promises, then what does it look like for us to follow up? And I would imagine that would come to PED.
So again, I'm not disagreeing with any initiative here. I'm trying to understand, because one thing I am hearing from staff is that they don't feel like they have clear direction from a majority of council about how to move forward with implementing some of these changes. I think they're hearing generally support from council for making changes to our zoning ordinance that encourage more housing, more affordable housing. But it seems like one of the challenges is for it not to get so confusing that like nothing happens, because it's just too confusing. So I'm just trying to understand. I think what you're saying is we've never done a review of the hotel overlay just to see how that's panned out. What's been the results? We have gotten reports every once in a while of how many hotels have applied to use the buy right process and use the community benefits table. So we do know that, and we know how much money has been pledged through that community benefits table as a result. But we'd need to understand more about what the expectations would be around reviewing it, which I think that's fine. Just to understand what we'd be looking at. And for an overlay like you're talking about around housing, clearly we're talking about urban corridors and multifamily housing. That makes sense to me. Some of the other things that we've heard talked about are things like flag lots and cottage homes, which of course wouldn't go in that kind of an overlay. That's more of a neighborhood change. And that's where I think we hear about displacement, using displacement concepts to avoid displacement, and some that would be kind of a different overlay, or maybe could be addressed through just where it goes into effect, I think is what I'm hearing you say. I'm feeling for staff, because I'm sure they're like, okay, what are we supposed to do first? And what?
That's the conversation, right? We're always trying to count to 4. And so I'm just trying to say that, like, while I'm hearing we have a hotel overlay map and we're working on a displacement overlay, displacement protection overlay, which I support. At the same time, we keep getting this push for building housing, and it's probably that part of the hotel overlay map and a overlay to expedite some of our multifamily housing on transit corridors would be in the same map, because I know our community would like to see apartments, maybe more than hotel units. All that to say, I would like to see us look at all of those options. I would like to support all the options if we are going to review them for the outcomes, because our goal that we agreed on was equitable, affordable housing.
I appreciate you bringing this up, Kim. And it's something I actually was in line with that same idea. When we were bringing up this displacement overlay, to me, it connects to a much larger process, and that's where my brain went. So I think what you're saying is something we've all really mentioned it over the years about moving to a more clear buy right process for multifamily housing that puts it in the places we want and gets us the outcomes we need. And we could be doing this. Like right now, we've got so many things coming to us, and I could understand why staff are feeling a little like, whoa, how do we approach this? And at last PED, we got a great outline of how we might take chunks of ordinances and come back to council every few months, working through committees in the meantime and in between. And right now we're talking about flag lots. We're talking about, what is the big one?
Reduction.
Okay. So the problem is we could be doing them all as one overlay. We really could. And it could be along the corridors. We could protect some of the neighborhoods. They'd have a separate layer. It could do all of the upzoning to multifamily along those corridors. We could wrap it all into one multifamily overlay that had point system and stuff. I was talking with Maggie about it recently and drafting some ideas. Like, that's a different
even
process.
in neighborhoods, Sage?
Excuse me?
Even in neighborhoods, I was just, I mean.
Well, I think so. Yeah. I mean, you could, if the goal is to focus housing where we can get it along transportation corridors.
Say more about that. Some confused.
Trying to get it along transportation corridors where we have already density, we have traffic, we have transportation access, et cetera. Instead of seeing so much pressure in our more smaller neighborhoods, you know, in the distance and in the periphery where we're seeing clearing of trees and stuff, we could be focusing it on these corridors. So I guess one of the things I was bringing up and talking with various staff about and called a couple of you about is that, you know, maybe we should be thinking broader. And I see those next steps as like a step, but until there's displacement in this broader conversation, I'm feeling very piecemeal. And I would love for us to start looking towards multifamily overlay with a community benefits table similar to the hotel thing. And once, in my mind, once we've kind of ratified that, then we could look back at hotels because I think, Kim, you're right. They are interconnected. And that if we want to see housing somewhere, did we just also zone that multifamily overlay where we've got some hotels, and could we restrict that more housing?
Did we make it easier to build a hotel than to build?
Right. I would love to talk with you more offline. We could talk for hours on this instead of an agenda briefing. But
well, what would be helpful though is for us to give some direction to staff. And I don't know if that's just a bunch of offline talking and we go circle back to staff or how we do it. But there's a lot of people that want to talk here. So let's hear what they have to say.
So I'll jump in. I agree with everything actually in theory that Kim and Sage has said. Where I do take, where I slightly have a disagreement is when we use the word equity. So the overlay related to the displacement issue is a direct request that has come from neighborhoods most likely affected. So in terms of equity, the goal would be to give them what they need and what they request. By virtue of adding other options in, you have, by definition, made the process inequitable. So I would suggest the first step as far as an overlay goes, even if it appears disjointed, is to find out what these particular community members want, because the refrain that I hear over and over again is we ask people what they need, and then rather than speaking to them and giving them what they need, we find ways to work around them and prioritize other efforts. So again, I'll say, perhaps we could start with the displacement overlay, which could probably be handled in short order if there is a majority of us that wants that overlay to be considered. And then at that point, once these neighborhoods feel safe and heard, we continue with the broader overlays. That's my thought on it.
Thank you so much for that, Antoinette. In that case, I hear what you're saying, and it does match what I'm hearing in community too. I'm certainly into going ahead and expediting the displacement overlay so that we can have a broader conversation.
And what I'd like to say is I hear all of you and I hear all the conversations we're having. I think that what we're doing, for me, I think we're putting so much in a bucket at one time. And I think it becomes confusing, not only to the council people and staff, it's going to be very confusing to the residents. So I think that, like Dan had come from, we basically talked in PED about different little steps of how we would do it. to sort of roll it out so it'll be more it's understanding, to make it easier for the residents to understand what we're doing. I think that's better, and also for staff to be able to put it in buckets so they can actually have something to follow along. But what I'm hearing now is this big, robust, all of it together, which actually confuses me. And because basically I think that the problems that the people are seeing in corridors, in basic corridors, okay, are different from the issues of the community, the neighborhoods. I think we can't really put those all together. It's no way. And Ben and I think we discussed when we were talking about PED, if we need to go ahead and move forward, like I said, as far as the corridors and putting in housing, affordable housing close to everything, that to me is a no-brainer. I can't not really see any way that some of the communities are going to be impacted by increasing affordable housing on these corridors. So that type of thing, I think basically we should find a way to sort of get a path forward for that. When we start talking about the communities, Ben and I, we said, how come we can't look at some of these communities? Because even Shiloh, certain areas, basically, they are prime for development. Okay, and these will not impact some of the other things that we're talking about. So why can't we look at, rather than look at overlays as far as something that prevents you from doing things, why can't we go into some of the communities and start locating areas that we can actually overlays to actually move forward? You see what I mean? The positive overlays, like this particular area, you know, it's very easy to move forward with this project here. And this particular area, we can go ahead and move this project here, because by doing that, the other communities will see these developments and say, wait a minute, it's not as bad as I thought. You see what I mean? So what we're doing is doing it in steps, but you're sort of educating the community as you move forward. So for overlays, for me, I think it should be overlays of where it is best to put certain housing, if we look at it from that perspective, as opposed to preventing certain things in certain neighborhoods.
And if I could, that is why we are taking the approach of incrementally looking at how we bundle any type of text amendments that may come to council for consideration. I mean, if you really think about what we are talking about is, if we're saying we are talking about an anti-displacement strategy utilizing zoning as a tool, essentially we're talking about a preservation tool. And that is going to take us a little time to understand where are the most appropriate places from a preservation perspective. And back to what Councilmember Mosley said, what is it that we are trying to preserve, right? What are we trying to prevent from occurring within a particular geography? And then on the other side, we're talking about a supply issue, that we need more housing in particular types of geographies. Where would those geographies most be appropriate? And yes, we've got a lot of foundational stuff. We've got our comp plan, we've got the missing middle study, we got a number of those things. But one of the things that we said at the PED meeting from a staff perspective is capacity, time, and our ability to do this in a way that we don't have significant unintended consequences. We need time to think, y'all, and we need to do it in a way, again, where we put this type of zoning, which is going to be surgical. It's going to be something over here that's different and something over there that's different, and that's going to take time, and we need to do it right once, not come back and consistently revise. And I'll stop there.
I'd love to jump in. So loving this conversation. I feel like we could probably even have a work session on this, although I do hear a lot that I feel like is coming into focus as I listen. First of all, I really share the enthusiasm that I hear universally right now of we need to come up with some zoning strategies that take care of and protect our most vulnerable, as well as get more housing in appropriate places. So that continues to feel really hopeful that we all have a lot of shared agreement on that. I also think staff has done a nice job starting to think through what a process would be. Remember, typically you'd spend like $500,000 hiring a consultant for 4 years to do this, and we aren't in that position. So I'm excited that we aren't planning to plan. We're going to figure out how to do, and this incremental bundle approach makes sense. I think where I'm hearing our council direction come in is reacting to what's in that first bundle and not understanding what strategy it ties to. The first bundle that we started to look at kind of had a mishmash of different things. And I think what we're trying to assert is, here are some of the priorities that we're interested in. So I'm hearing kind of a handful of micro goals, if you will, or strategies. That one is real clear sense that we need to figure out displacement protection. Another is that we want to figure out corridor density. And I tag in downtown, which already has so much infrastructure. So that's the second strategy. A third is missing middle in neighborhoods, which we have so many good tactical recommendations from our plan. And then there's citywide adjustments. And then I'd add a fifth of like red tape cutting. And I think this first bundle showed us stuff around citywide adjustments, a dash of corridor density, and a splash of missing middle. And that's nice. But I think as opposed to looking at different lines across different strategies, this gets to what I hear Sage and others talking about is like, show us the package for displacement. Show us the package for missing middle, not just bundling as they come up from the community or as they come up from us, but like, what's the comprehensive strategy? And I think, honestly, that is what's missing from this first bundle. I don't think that we should approach this in a like first come, first served as far as like line item edits. It's like, what is the density on corridor strategy? What is the displacement? And so I think that might give guidance to the bundling approach, which would be useful. It would allow us to look at all the pieces for that one strategy together and what the suite of text amendments would be. And then the last thing I'll say is I also agree that like I'm not really comfortable rolling forward on anything until we have a displacement approach that we all feel confident in. And so that's my first priority for us to look at. And I am grateful for the work P&Z has done and citizens who have been nudging us to look at amendments, but I want to understand our displacement approach before we make further tweaks. So hopefully
I think the spirit of my bringing this up in the PED conversation is because I'm not on PED. As y'all are going into your meeting, your next meeting, and looking at these, I wanted you to know that you could count on me for supporting the displacement overlay, displacement protection overlay. And I still want us to follow up on it to make sure it's working as we planned. Which we just haven't had a history of doing that.
I'll chime in so you know you have a confident fourth on the displacement first. And what I was drawing a blank on earlier are these other text amendments that are coming, the parking requirements minimum and the rising residential by right to 100,000 square feet to match commercial. And so I like these ideas greatly, but I feel like they could be a part of the process I was mentioning earlier, be achieved through that instead of this piecemeal approach. So I'm almost uncomfortable even hearing those before we look at the bigger thing, mostly because
when you Sage, can you be specific?
Yeah.
The other thing, the bigger thing, you're talking about a community benefits table tied to.
No, so what's coming up from P&Z, which is in this first bundle we're referring to and will come to us in August or September, is increasing, instead of 49 units before an apartment complex comes to council, it would be 100,000 square feet, which is similar to how other uses are in the community. So it was brought up from P&Z as like, why is residential harder than an office building? And I get that logic and I love it. But before we just go freeing up all this new housing by right, it seems like we could tie in the community benefits table. We could tie in the benefits we want before we just, free it up.
Yeah, you're saying you want to see a community benefits table tied to these changes.
I really do. I think it's important.
Okay, yeah, all I'm trying to
So-
do is concisely state what we're hearing from council. I am not wedded to one order or another order. I'm just concerned about staff saying, I don't understand the direction. I don't know what we're supposed to do first. I don't know.
Well,
And I know Brad's got
was
his
really helpful.
well,
PED's
and-
presentation from Steph Monson, the planning director, was great. It talked about it in bundles. And so, and I love
well,
that
but if
plan,
you're
but
saying
what
you don't
what I
want
want
to,
to say is just, let me finish, is just that what's in those bundles might need a little tweaking, but the process itself is great. And it will get to us in stages like we're talking about in a way that the community can understand and have input. But what's in those bundles might need a little tweaking is what I'm getting at.
And we're happy to do that. I just want to go on record that we are happy to do that. We thought that you all were kind of nudging us to move those proposals that are in bundle 1 sooner. That's the only reason they're in there. I'm sorry, Mayor Brad.
Just very quickly, love the conversation, everyone, but I want to try to bring just a little attention to one thing to alleviate a potential bit of confusion, especially as this begins to be discussed and the messaging around it. I think that the terminology around a anti-displacement or displacement overlay is a bit of a misnomer. It is important to understand what an overlay is. An overlay does not somehow limit the existing zoning. It adds additional options. So the very nature of trying to stop something from happening like displacement, you need to get down, if you're going to use zoning as the tool to do that, to the fundamental base zoning. Adding an overlay, as we've done with our hotel overlay, just gives people additional options. So it doesn't, if you believe that the existing zoning is not meeting your demand, or in this case, dissuading displacement, adding an overlay just gives an additional option for people to do. It doesn't actually do anything to the base zoning. So as Deborah's mentioned, if we're looking at anti-displacement as the goal to be dealt with, you're really looking at placing some sort of preservation zoning in place, very similar to, but not exactly like historical preservation, or using different anti-displacement tools, which quite frankly, in the zoning context are quite a bit more surgical. Zoning is a bit trying to do surgery with a sledgehammer for these things at times. And I just want to dissuade the public in general from thinking that there is such a thing as an overlay that somehow has a negative effect on the existing underlying zoning. It just adds additional things, which is why with the hotel overlay district, people can still continue to do anything they could do previously under that zoning, but there is this additional option that the overlay allows. So I know everybody is focused on the same goal, but I think it's important for messaging to be on the same verbiage as well.
Yeah, the wording has troubled many of us in conversation. So getting to those right words would be helpful. I've heard, protection, preservation, district, overlay. I mean, there's so many things, but conservation. So yes, without being tied to the explicit meaning of all of those words, this conversation moving forward would be incredibly helpful.
One other, on that note, just a question for staff. Sometimes I feel like the council is in their mind, I feel like we've been talking about, for example, multifamily housing with a buy right process with a community benefits table forever. And I thought a majority of council wanted to do something like that. But so two things. One is I think staff was saying, well, I don't know if we're hearing, a majority of council wanting to do that. So we as a council have to figure out how to communicate what it is we want to do and in what order we want to do it. And then there's the issue around this terminology and what we can do. I mean, I've had several conversations with staff where they've said, well, you guys are talking about this or that, but you can't actually do that. But you can do this other thing, but you're not talking about that. So I don't want us as council to be thinking we're having an informed discussion about the direction we want to give and staff coming back and saying, well, that's not actually possible. So if there's a way And I don't know what that looks like. Maybe you guys feel like you got it all managed at PED with Sage, Sandra, and Maggie. But if there's a way to help us have a more informed conversation so we can give better direction, I don't know what that looks like, but that would be helpful so we don't run around saying things like we want a displacement overlay, and that's not actually the thing that you would do. you would rezone neighborhoods to put in place preservation, is what I think I'm hearing you say. That would be helpful to understand. I mean, that to me does feel pretty separate from, say, putting an overlay on an urban corridor to allow for multifamily housing by right with a community benefits table. That feels like two totally separate things, but maybe I'm not understanding that. And I don't know why it would matter if we did one first or the other first, but maybe it does. Maybe I'm not understanding how that would work. So that would just help me have a better, more productive conversation about zoning. And I'm done, but Maggie, you had your hand up.
I mean, I was gonna toss out that perhaps we would want a work session on this, although I'm happy to keep rolling up my sleeves on PED and having a lot of conversations with other councilwomen so we stay on the same page going forward, but open to that idea if it feels like I feel like the conversation we're having here, and even here, Shanika isn't here today, we're talking about this in a way that we haven't just been able to do yet. You know, we've said very high level, and so I think this is really fruitful for us to talk through. I wonder if I'm hearing an approach that really is talking about these clusters by strategy, displacement first, density and corridors second, maybe missing middle and neighborhoods third, then general and citywide fourth. But that's just us having, that's what I feel like I'm hearing from a conversation here. But I guess what I'm saying is, I think it's important for us to have you all kind of either distill what you think you heard and then run it by all of us before we get into it in PED, or kind of bring that to a work session for us to kick the tires on. But I think that there's real clarity is those are different strategies and we don't want them scattered through different bundles. We need to look at the pictures together. And I guess we can see that at PED next, and then of course run it by the rest of the team, or perhaps a work session. I think it just depends on how clear you feel like you're hearing from us today.
I think we're hearing you relatively clearly, but what I will caution also is that some of these strategies are not so clearly delineated that it's in this bucket or the other bucket. There can be mutual, I think, and complementary efforts. I think what we've got to focus on is what are our goals versus what is the, is it we're implementing this in middle, or are we doing this or doing that? But what's the goals that we are trying to achieve? And what are the tools from a regulatory perspective that we can utilize from zoning that can help us achieve those goals? And I think we hear you all. We need to go back and determine what's the best approach for us to bring this to you, like in a work session or whatever, for us to ensure that we're on the right track in terms of the path forward. I believe that we brought you all a fairly decent process, but we didn't necessarily probably do a good enough job of linking those individual text amendments or those bundles to goals or initiatives or intended impacts. So we'll come back, and if you give us a week or so just to kind of process, and we'll come back with something definitely before PED, the next PED meeting. Vice Mayor.
Yes, I just want to ask Brad a question because I'm a little confused with this myself. When we talked about corridors and doing the units, not having to come back for any type of approval from council, right? We were talking about upping them out, like I think it was 100,000 square feet. That's what PDD was talking about. And by right, and when we start doing that type of zoning by right, how does, when all of a sudden we impact it by saying, okay, there's a benefits table on it, there's these overlays where you can't do this, does that sort of negate the by right issue? I mean, I'm just trying to, I'm sort of confused as it.
You're not confused, Sandra. I think you've actually very well articulated what one of the balancing acts is and the complexity in this. We have different knobs as staff that we can turn. One is we can turn a knob that allows for much more easily developable housing options. But as you do that everywhere, you are likely in some circumstances to have greater displacement. So that's a knob that we would want to turn the other way. So some of this is you're trying to activate two very different processes and focus them on different areas. So a big part of this is to determine where the areas are that you want to just turn that lever open a little bit more to allow for more housing development easier, and those areas where you want to perhaps back it up. None of those things, as I said, with zoning, you are a bit imprecise because every action is going to have an opposite, perhaps negative reaction. By opening up a little more and allowing by right options, you're going to have less say at the council level in what gets developed. But on the opposite end, by increasing barriers that make displacement more difficult, you're also going to make development of housing in those areas more difficult to do. So figuring out, you don't want to do one size fits all. They are two different tools, and it's determining where in the city one tool should be used and where the other. If you put them together, they probably just work against one another.
Hey, thank you. That's why I was a little confused.
All righty then, that was a committee discussion.
I mean, the longest council committee agenda review I think I've done.
It was
So,
like a work session.
I mean, it was like an 8 work session. Yeah.
All right then.
But let me just close out. Kim, do go watch that PED meeting if you can, because it really steps through the process outlined. It was so informative.
I did. Thank you.
Oh, okay, good.
You know, Kim, she was probably there.
I always do.
So I'm going to move to our next. I do want to say that I think today was very helpful for staff. I think to me, and I know our planning department's listening too, very helpful to hear the discussion today. And I think that gives us some info, like Deborah said, we need a little bit of time to decompress, but I think that gives us some structure to move forward and hopefully bring this forward to council in a way that meets your needs and the community's needs. So thank you for that. So I'm going to cover the next two. Since Rachel is not here today, I'm going to cover her two council committee agendas, and I'll do my best to do that. Certainly, probably won't do it as well as Rachel could, but I'm going to start with HCD. HCD, your next meeting is August 20th, and you have 3 items on that agenda. You have one item is permanent supportive housing at Ramada, and that is an action item. Emily Ball, our homeless strategy division manager, is asking for a vote and to move forward to city council, and that's concerning an HCD recommendation for $1.5 million to go towards supportive services funding at the Ramada property. I think there's been a number of meetings and discussions at HCD already, and I know the continuum of care is also bringing a recommendation forward. So I think all that comes together at your August meeting. Then hopefully we were able to move that forward to full council for consideration. The other item, another important item, is the affordable housing bond. We're going to have Sasha Bertinsky there, our affordable housing officer. And this is just information sharing, but she's going to give a review of kind of what happened with the 2016 affordable housing bond and what was accomplished with that, but as well as begin to have a conversation about the 2024 affordable housing bond and what are some of the considerations for allocations of that bond and maybe how that syncs up with our affordable housing plan recommendations. Then the last item is similar to PED. Rachel will be there to continue the discussion of the FY 2025 committee work plan for HCD. Any questions on that, council committee? Great. And so our last committee item is Equity and Engagement Committee. We've got 4 items on that committee. The first is we'll have, and excuse me, I should have said this, that committee is scheduled for August 20th at 1 p.m. First item is the standing and reparations update. Slav Minaya, Mayor will be there to provide that to the committee. Deborah touched on this a little bit as part of environment and safety, but we'll have a similar presentation on Elevate AVL, so that's the climate resource engagement update. This particular update will have Bridget and Kiera there, but they'll be a little more focused on the engagement efforts that are around that that initiative. And then finally, or not finally, but second to finally, we'll have, I think several council members attended this, but last year we had a festival in neighborhoods. I went to that. It was a wonderful event. Great opportunity to see some of our neighborhoods and other things that are happening. So Christina Israel will be at Equity Engagement to give a preview of that event and kind of what's scheduled for September 14th. And finally, Rachel will be working on that committee's FY 2025 committee work plan. Any questions on the equity and engagement agenda? Great, thank you. So that brings us to our second to last item, and that is a review of the 8-week agenda. Couple of things I want to point out to council on that. Ms. Campbell mentioned this early on in our council agenda review, but the Community Reparations Committee extension request is going to be moved to the August 27th agenda, so more to come on that. One report of interest for August 27th is we'll have NCDOT available to provide a report, kind of a project overview on the Merriman Avenue Complete Street project. DOT is going to walk through some of the data related to that. I think that's a really positive outcome and report, so looking forward to that. You have a number of public hearings scheduled for that agenda, and I want to draw your attention to 2, and you'll set the public hearing for this at your July meeting, but in August, we're going to ask that you close the paper right-of-way on Hiawassee, so that's the one behind Harris Cherokee Center, Thomas Wolfe. And we're also going to ask you to consider the conditional zoning for the temporary substation near Patton Avenue. So these are really the action items that come to council related to the Rankin Avenue substation rebuild. And again, that involves a street closure. We're actually going to have a real estate exchange that comes to council, as well as a conditional zoning. So we're trying to sync all these actions up into a single meeting. So that's just something to flag for you. 2 other items on the 8-week agenda. We have the Recreate Asheville master plan. And that, again, we talked about that coming to the Environment and Safety Council Committee. That'll be at your August meeting for adoption. I gave a little bit of background on why we want to see adoption of that plan, but again, excited to see that move forward. And then I wanted to take a second, and I had planned to say this, and so this really relates to your conversation about PED. But one of the things that we've got a number of UDO text amendments that are related to housing, and they come from a variety of sources. We have staff that have initiated some based on our missing middle. We have Mr. Barry Bialik has initiated some as a private resident. Those are scheduled for September, or for the September meeting, excuse me. We have 2 amendments that were initiated by planning and zoning. And what I wanted to say is, I think it would be helpful if, in terms of agenda planning, if we were able to group and prioritize some of those housing amendments that are kind of in the queue, but do so in a way that gives staff time really to bring back an anti-displacement overlay coupled with maybe a suite of anti-displacement strategies that we can really make sure we've got that worked through and in place. So I would suggest that as we plan that 8-week agenda, that we prioritize the anti-displacement work and then create a bundle of housing amendments that really meets a little more strategic and kind of meets the needs that council wants to put forward and aligns with our anti-displacement strategies. So I'll stop there. I think Councilman Ullman has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I guess where you're going is kind of what I was reflecting on from what we talked about earlier. I think that instead of I'm very grateful that we've had a lot of community leadership to point to specific UDO things and that they've already gone through the queue. And that's why they're kind of tentatively on our agendas. But I think what council is really uniformly saying is that we don't want the piecemeal line items. We want to see displacement stuff first. And then we want to see the different line items connected to each other for a broader strategy or goal. So I guess I'm just reaffirming the inquiry you had that I'd be happy to readjust what's on this 8-week agenda to get to what council was saying in the earlier discussion.
Great,
At
thank
PED,
you.
you're saying at PED. Yeah. Ben, you're going to have to adjust your wording. Brad just lectured you about how there's no such thing as but anyway, just giving you a hard time,
Yeah.
but
Yes, that's true. I was reading from the paper and I shouldn't have done that. I should have channeled my inner Brad before saying that.
But Maggie, Ben, I think what you're suggesting in terms of the order of things based on the discussion you heard here today would be for it to go back to PED and go in that order?
I do. I think that council's goals should drive the actions and how we schedule those. And I guess I'd like the opportunity to meet with city manager's office, CED, and PUD, our departments, and really come up with the strategy that again, makes sense and aligns with what council's asking us to do. So I think we need to take a look at the 8-week agenda and get that set up in a way that supports the process we want to use. And I appreciate your comments, Councilwoman Ullman and Mayor. And that's all I have.
I'm going to send an email so it's for information to the council group and I'm sure staff here may be aware of it, but Charlotte's comprehensive plan has a populations vulnerable to the displacement overlay. So we're not using unfamiliar language in North Carolina.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Say it again,
email.
the title, Kim, can you just say it again, the title, the phrasing?
Populations vulnerable to displacement overlay. So we may not want to use the same tool, but it is not uncommon language to use overlay when discussing zoning in North Carolina.
And I guess maybe we're just getting a little too funny with the language, but I think it's just meaning zoning. It's just a zoning tool is what I'm hearing.
Let's not belabor the words too much. We all have.
Yeah, I mean, I think I hear Brad's point about if it's an overlay, you're not affecting the underlying zoning. However, if you make the overlay the zoning,
right?
Maybe that's
yeah.
That's the difference.
It may effectively work as down zoning, right?
Right. They just rezoned the neighborhood and called it an overlay for whatever reason. But I mean, I think we still think about. Well, anyway, yeah. I think the problem for the lawyers is we have historic overlays, which are literally overlaying underlying zoning. And so maybe what we're talking about here is we need to do the preservation piece. We've got to address the underlying zoning. Down zoning is to your point.
Whatever it ends up being called, I'm very excited that we're having this conversation. I appreciate everybody's just general desire to work on the housing crisis is what I'm seeing across our committees, across our staff, across council. We're just going for it. And I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the momentum and conversation today.
So I'll turn it back over to Ms. Campbell. That concludes my review of agenda items.
Ben, I don't think that there is anything left on our agenda other than there is a closed session that I will read unless there are further questions. Maggie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, unless there's anything else, I can read the closed session motion.
So
Okay, great.
I'm confused. How do we vote in a virtual meeting to go into a closed session? Brad, can you clear that up?
Yeah, I'm glad somebody brought that
Individually.
up. So, yeah, so just, we don't take substantive votes, but there's no prohibition against procedural votes in this. And just to go into closed session, it would be very similar to approving minutes or just taking a vote to go into a recess. So you are permitted to do that without suspending your rules because that applies to substantive votes.
Do you have to do an individual roll call, Brad?
Yeah, the same virtual rules are required. We do have to do a roll call vote on this.
Okay, do I have a motion to go into closed session?
Yes, I move that the Asheville City Council go into closed session for the following reasons. 1, to prevent disclosure of information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to the laws of North Carolina or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A1. The laws that make the information privileged and confidential are North Carolina General Statute 143-318-10E. And 2, to consult with an attorney employed by the city about matters with respect to which the attorney-client privilege between the city and its attorney must be preserved, including but not limited to the handling of the following matter. Carol Ivy Roth versus City of Asheville, court file number 16-CVS-1938. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A3. I am done.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll do a roll call vote. Sandra Kilgore.
Aye.
Antoinette Mosley.
Aye.
Kim Roney.
Aye.
Sage Turner.
Aye.
Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Okay, we have moved to go into a closed session. Dan, so do we need to log out and then we're logging back into the closed session?
Yes, please
Yes.
log out of here and then log into the other link.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.